Thank you very much. I will refrain from what I assure my friend from Texas will be an incredibly long fight over this amendment. And I find the language that's used is kind of fascinating. Escape from the obligation to being open. Is the colleague suggesting the Delaware Chancery Court is not open, is somehow an unfair court? I find it outrageous, such a statement. Maybe you can tell me. Is it not a competent court? Is it not an open court?
Are you asking me something?
Oh, yeah. You're the one that said escape the obligation of making the process open.
Actually, Senator, bankruptcy cases are not heard in Delaware Chancery Court.
No, excuse me, in Delaware.
They are not.
Bankruptcy courts in Delaware are not open?
They are not open to employees of companies like Enron who cannot afford...
What sense do you mean open?
Excuse me, Senator?
In what sense do you mean open? The record's not open, or they can't conveniently get there?
Employees of companies like Enron literally cannot go to Delaware and hire local counsel, which the Delaware Bankruptcy Court requires of them before they can make an appearance. And that effectively cuts thousands of small employees, pensioners, and local trade creditors out of the bankruptcy process. If they can't afford it, they're not there.
Can they afford it in the states in which they reside?
You know, in the states that they reside in, they have local counsel, and local counsel can go down the block and appear on their behalf.
Can they afford it in those states?
Yes, and they do, and they appear.
Right. Well, I will. I only have 7 minutes, and I should talk about the Bankruptcy Act that's before us, because this is a proposed additional law, and there'll be plenty of time to debate it. Let me ask you a couple questions here. And by the way, this did start 8 years ago, this legislation, but there's been numerous changes to it in 8 years. 8 years ago, the person who stopped its passage was me, because it did not have a safe harbor in it. It did not put women and children to the front of the line. It did not do a whole range of things that subsequently have occurred. And we relitigated this 2 years ago, not in this committee, but on the floor of the Senate in conference, and we did it in great detail. And I might say I'd ask unanimous consent that a statement that I have, Mr. Chairman, be entered for the record, if I may, at this point. And to say that I think one of the very important amendments that should be added to this legislation is the Schumer Amendment, which in fact was part of the legislation, was part of an agreement was crafted between the House and the Senate, and was part of what passed out of here as part of the bill overwhelmingly. The numbers that the chairman cited, 87, 88, 89 votes, whatever the numbers were, the several times it's passed out, contain the Schumer Amendment. But I am confused about one thing here. There is no question, coming from a family that had been, unfortunately, an excessive consumer of medical health care expenses, how someone can be absolutely crippled by these medical expenses. There's no question about that, in my view. Where I have difficulty trying to figure out is, should the irresponsibility of the federal government and the state government thrust upon the creditor? And what confuses me is, let me move away from health care for just a moment. There's an awful lot of people in the National Guard right now who are being sent overseas. They have jobs where their combined income of the husband and wife may be $80,000, $90,000 a year. But when the person, the male or female who is sent overseas, called up by the National Guard or the Reserves, maybe was making $60,000 a year, is now, based on their rank, making $24,000 a year. They have the same car payments. They have the same house payments. They have the same tuition payments. They have the same bills. My question is, if they cannot pay those bills because of an extended tour, which many are going through, and they have to declare bankruptcy, should the creditors who have lent money to them based upon their initial income, should they be the ones that pay the cost, in effect, of their inability to pay? Or is that a larger responsibility of the public at large? And that's what confuses me about your arguments, Professor Warren. They're very compelling. They're literally true, but in a sense, they beg the question. It seems to me that the federal government should be seeing to it that every American is put in a position where their health care costs are such that if in fact they have these extraordinary expenses, that it's a social responsibility of the community to help them, as opposed to the social responsibility of the particular doctor or the particular bank that lent the money or the particular creditor who has put forward money assuming there was any ability to pay. I'm just in a philosophic question. Should anyone who has extraordinary medical expenses, unquestionably extraordinary medical expenses, should they be able to say when there's an inability to pay all other bills, whatever they are? I mean, if they were going to pay those medical expenses, they wouldn't be able to pay any other bill, from the gas company to whomever. Is it a societal requirement we should write into the bankruptcy code that says that the gas company should subsidize the payment of those medical bills, that the local drugstore should subsidize the payment of those medical bills? Maybe we should. I mean, I'm being deadly earnest here, because you make a very compelling and mildly demagogic argument that talks about what is true. All of these things are true. And so my question is it from a philosophic standpoint, is it the responsibility of the gas company and the drugstore and whoever else you named to make sure that these people do not have to make these hard choices? Or is that a responsibility of the government or the people at large? And that's my only question I'll ask. Then I'm asking you, Professor.
Senator, I think you've put your finger on the heart of what the bankruptcy bill, or bankruptcy in general, not this bill.
No, forget bankruptcy. I'm asking a larger question.
No,
forget
that's
about
what
bankruptcy.
I mean. It's the question of what role bankruptcy plays.
No, that's not my question. I'd like you to answer my question. What role is there under what you would consider to be an appropriate form of government where we legislate? Do we say that people who in good faith provide a service for an individual, that the individual is unable to meet because of a legitimately horrific and extraordinary dilemma that was an act of God, that who should be responsible for taking them out from under that crushing burden? Should it be the automobile company who lent the money to purchase a car, the drugstore that lent them money, that provided a service, in effect lent them money because there's a bill for the drug bill, the utility company, the guy who has the lawn service company? I mean, whose responsibility is it? Because that's really the question. Because if you buy on to this argument, which is very compelling in my view, you're saying the creditors should be the ones to buy on to that philosophically enshrined in a piece of legislation obligation. That's my question.
Senator, I think you're exactly right. And that is that we need fewer families to need to turn to the bankruptcy system. We have a broken health care finance system in the United States.
Right.
And all I can do is point out that it is bankrupting families.
Absolutely right.
Until we fix the broken health care finance system,
Right.
those families have to turn somewhere. And that means now they turn as a last-ditch effort to the bankruptcy
Right.
court.
And that means they turn to asking the people that they borrowed money from to pay for their health care cost, right?
Senator, the cost...
Isn't that literally correct?
It is literally correct
Thank
that
you.
the
That's all I
cost
wanted.
of a broken health care system are borne throughout the economy.
We are asking, and I may be ready to do this. We're going to ask the gas company, the drugstore, the automobile dealer to pay for the broken system, instead of having the nerve to come and say it's a moral obligation of a nation to pay for that broken system. Why should it be someone who sits there living in a $2 million home for whom it lent no money to that person? Why do they not have an obligation to pay for that instead of the guy who owns the drugstore at the corner pay for that? That's my only point. Let's just be honest what we're doing here. And it may make sense, and I might add for the record, I'd like to put in the record a Forbes article, and I'd like to ask you whether it's an accurate quote, Professor. They quote you in an article entitled "Everybody Knows It's Credit" in Forbes magazine, saying, quote, "The lobbyists are going to be the only ones who really profit," scoffs Elizabeth Warren, Harvard law professor. I think you're dead right, because it points out in here, as you point out, we have to find new boogeymen. The one people who aren't going to benefit under this are the credit card companies, as you point out in here. I submit this to the for the record. I'd invite any response in writing from anyone who'd like to respond to the article. We'll make it available to you. Okay? But I just think we should be honest about this thing, and we're making the gas company, which I don't like the gas company. I don't like many companies, but anyway. Pay is, we just ought to acknowledge what we're doing here when we make these kind of assertions.
Thank you, Senator Biden.
Can Professor Warren just respond to the quote? She was legend. Would you want to just respond to the quote? Okay.
I think the senator makes an entirely fair point about externalizing the cost, and I would add only one caveat to it. Not only does this bill treat all debtors alike, in many ways it treats all creditors alike. The gas company doesn't have the capacity to change its pricing to reflect these risks, or has very limited capacity. But I remind you of what the credit card companies have already...
Should it? It implies they should.
No,
Should the gas company be required to change the prices to reflect these?
Oh, of course they do,
okay.
Senator.
Well, the way you stated, you said they don't have the capacity. The implication is maybe they should have that capacity.
My point is the losses will go to some creditors who cannot reflect this in their prices. But look at the cases cited in my testimony, where credit card companies, I have a specific case in Ray McCarthy, but nothing unusual about it. A woman who borrowed $2,200, the credit, she paid back $2,100 over the 2 years preceding bankruptcy, and at the end of that period of time, she was told she still owed $2,600. With fees and interest, I submit, Senator, that there are many in the credit industry right now who are getting their bankruptcies prepaid. That is, they have squeezed enough out of these families in interest and fees and payments that never
Maybe we should talk about usury rates then. Maybe that's what we should be talking about, not bankruptcy.
I'll be the first. Invite me.
No, I know you will, but let's call a spade a spade. Your problem with the credit card companies is usury rates from your position. It's not about the bankruptcy bill.
But, Senator, if you're not going to fix that problem, you can't take away the last shred of protection for these families.
Okay. You're very good, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Biden. I'm advised...